everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's a horse thing. So after my first Collecta unboxing, I saw a horse in there that was perfect for making like a warrior Indian type of horse. So after a lot of looking on Pinterest, I kind of gathered up a good idea of what I wanted, and I ended up using the Collecta Ardennes Stallion to do this custom. So this was a lot different than what I usually do. You know, I usually stick to something realistic, and I had to do a ton of research for this project. However, I think he came out amazing, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. So this is the model that I was talking about, the Collecta Ardennes Stallion. He is beautiful, although I do run into a little issue later. However, first I decide to go outside, it's pretty nice out, and go ahead and prime my model. So I shook it up really well, and then just gave him a really light coat of sealant. That way I didn't start blocking out all the details. Then I came back in and I was looking at the labeling on the bottom. I'm like, well, if I go to take pictures, it's gonna be really thick. And besides, with all the customizing I'm doing, it's not really their horse anymore. So I just decided to go ahead and scrape it off and sand it all off. That way you don't see it and it's nice and smooth. And it's more of like my horse, because as I said, it's not really theirs anymore. So then I still ended up using my 2-part epoxy, so it comes in 2 parts, obviously. Part A and B, you mix them together and they'll start forming a chemical reaction that you can use. It is a lot better than air dry clay, honestly, because it doesn't crack. It is super easy to form and amazing. So I kind of rolled it into a little tube type thing and just pressed it onto the belly of the horse, since it was still really rough, and I used some water to smooth it out, as well as my silicone sculpting tools. And then I decided to let this dry overnight, and thankfully this was super easy to bond to the model. So now I'll get into a little bit of my issue. So I was really debating on coat color for a really long time. So first I thought, well, maybe it could be like a blood bay, you know, because the almost chestnutty color, first I love bays, but then the almost chestnut color reminds me of the fact that it would be like a warrior horse, you know, the whole blood thing. I'm sorry if that's kind of too much for you. However, so I thought that that would be a good idea. But then as I did more research on blood bays, I realized that most bays don't have a lot of markings to begin with. So even though the American Indian horse can have a lot of different color variations, it looked like they could be almost anything. A lot had very unique, amazing, beautiful markings, and I really wanted that. But if I went with the bay option, that was just not realistic enough for me. So after a lot of tampering with the color, I was just like, well, why don't we just go with a light brown that I can add in some red brown hues to it, but it's not a bay, but it's not exactly a chestnut. But then another issue was the fact that the Ardennes breed is a draft horse. So American Indian horses are not draft horses. Never. They are never a draft horse. They are very sturdy. I think they said, and sure-footed. So that's why they're like warrior type horses, but they are never a draft horse. However, I was just kind of like, well, so be it. It's fine. I'm just going to go ahead and use this model anyway, because I felt like he was just perfect for this, and I couldn't give that up. So even after I decided on what coat color I was going to do, it still took me absolutely forever to get somewhat of a close color that I wanted. I wanted it to be brown, but with still red hints in it, so I was kind of using a little bit of chestnut paint that I had and then adding brown, but then it was too dark, so I had to add white, but then that wasn't good enough, so I had to go back and add some more brown, and I'm putting water on the model to try and smooth it out, but it's really not going to matter here in a second. Because what I actually ended up doing was, look at me, right, painting the pretty horse, okay? And then I looked at him, and I was kind of like, oh, this wasn't really what I was expecting. Thankfully, I didn't get through the whole horse, but this was about when I was like, you know, this color is way too dark, and it just wasn't what I was looking for. I actually just took some sandpaper, alright, and I used the back side and fixed that And then I messed with the color a little bit more, added more white, added a little bit of brown, but still a little bit of red, and then added more brown, so on and so forth. So now I went and watered down my paint and put that on. And I know it doesn't look that different on camera, but it looked a lot better to me. So this is what I stuck with. So then using my Rust-Oleum Matte Clear, I know it's backwards for you guys, I'm sorry, because I almost just went right into pastel, and then I was like, oh wait, no, I can't do that. I do this so that way it smooths out the surface, because if you just put it on top of paint, I know it will look smooth to the eye, but when you're putting pastel on, it's going to get grainy and like bumpy and stuff. So if I put the spray on, it's going to make it nice and smooth and a lot easier. So I just gave him a brief little coat and let him dry before starting pastel. So I gave him a whole day to dry before starting pastel. So here I am putting on my gloves because you don't want to touch the horse with your hands because the natural oils will mess them up. So then I have my makeup brush. That is what I use to apply my pastels. And then I went in with my pan pastel. I think the color was burnt sienna, and I know it looks like I'm pressing the horse really hard. I guess it's just how I do it. I don't really notice it until I watch what I'm filming. So I went and I did it on his whole backside. I didn't do any underneath the stomach yet. I did it on his legs and his shoulder and his face and stuff. I really just wanted the first layer to be a bright orange type because that's where I really wanted it to stick out. I'll go back in with other stuff later, but here I am shaking up the matte stuff, and then I know I look really stupid. I'm just blowing the extra pastel off so it doesn't get stuck on the horse when I'm spraying. So this will be his second layer of matte spray. I just gave him a thin coat, and it's actually really pretty outside today, just saying. After 5 or so layers of pastel, this is what he looks like, and I'm going to brag on myself a little bit because I'm so proud. The pastels came out so pretty and so smooth. Well, except for this back foot got grainy. But anyways, I mean, just the color is stunning and it looks beautiful and it's smooth and he's so pretty. So then after he was completely dried, I decided to start on markings. So thank you guys so much for all your help with the polls, but I decided to do option 4, which was most voted on. It was a bald face, but not including the eyes, because personally, I don't like when the eyes are included, because then when I do the eyes, it makes the eyes look weird and just like little black dots. So I was just like, this is what I'm gonna do. So it took a really long time of outlining everything and making sure that everything was super nice and neat and exactly how I wanted it. But I really went around and took my time making sure to water down my paint and all of that, and just outlining everything, and then going in with some paint and covering up everything inside. And this was just a super time-consuming process. So then here's my reference photo. So I know a lot of you guys wanted option 4. And honestly, when I first put this up, I was like, yeah, I really wanted option 4 too. But the more I thought about it, and I did have a suggestion come up, and it was that when I'm doing my warrior paint, it looks better when the white markings are underneath it instead of the basic coat color. So the more I thought about that, the more I was like, okay, I'm just going to go with option 1. That way I will be able to see my warrior paint. But don't worry, because option 4 will definitely be on another horse at some point in the future. I love those markings. I also loved option 3. Option 1, I think, is just what fit this horse the best, which I was having a lot of issues with the watered down paint, and it was like not sticking because of the sealant. So I just realized I had to add a little bit more paint for it to stick, but it was kind of annoying because then it was like doing that thing where it separates. I guess it was some weird reaction between the paint. And then I went outside and I just sealed everything. And then the wind was being weird, so I turned around and did it the other way. So sorry you guys can't see that. Here's me with some pink pastel to make the muzzle kind of pink. And then here are the hooves, which I did not record this, but what I did was I did pastel on the bottom, and then I just took some white paint and like did some herring so that way it looks dirty but it still has the hair. And then there were the eyes. So I actually watched DJB's video on how to do eyes because I really wanted to make sure that these were super realistic, and it was kind of hard, but I just ended up doing a full black circle on both sides and then just sat and let it dry before I moved on to the next part. So then, still following DJB's tutorial, I added like a little flesh color to the front corner of the eye, I forget the technical term, and then took white and added it to the back in kind of like a moon shape that wasn't super thick, and then I went back with some black and fixed it, and then took some gold paint that I have and added in some details there. And then with some white paint, I actually signed the hooves after I finished them, so I just used a whole bunch of different colored browns and made them look really nice, and then signed that. And then I started on the mane and tail. So this took a really long time, but I am very, very happy with how it came out. So I just took a dark brown, really, and went through quite a few times with my brown Liquitex paint, and just trying to make sure that those corners look really nice. And then I went and did the exact same thing with the tail, and you couldn't see it just there, but I got a few coats on that. And then I put on one final coat and started blending in with some lighter brown. So personally, I like the tip of the tail to be lighter than the rest, so I'll fade that in and then also put in my highlights with some lighter brown. So I'll just run it over like this and try and blend it in best I can, which honestly, it actually came out really, really nice. And when it was all done and blended, it looked like this. So then I decided I was going to go ahead and start on the accessories that I want for the horse, even though I kind of had to backtrack with that later. So I have these really small beads that I chose in red, blue, and like gold. And I decided I was going to take some embroidery floss and string them on and attach some miniature feathers to them, which ended up turning out really, really nice. There's my embroidery floss, and all I did was like break it apart because it's just multiple threads woven together, and I used my super glue to attach the beads. And there's my bead. So I'm put some super glue on both ends so I could string the beads on easily, and then I took some super glue to hold it in place, and then I had to straighten it out, otherwise it just did not work. So I continued adding more and more beads. So that's what it looks like after the first one is on. Looked really, really nice, and I kept going, and I would have little strips where there were no beads, and then I'm kind of just attaching it to the horse to see what it was going to look like, and that's what it looked like, and I absolutely loved it. So then I realized I needed to do the Indian markings, and that's the reference I had pulled up for what everything meant. So I had blue and red paint, and the camera is focusing on the beads, which was super annoying, but I started on the circle around the eye, which basically, I think it was like strengthens eyesight, brings awareness, something like that. And then I started doing these stripes on the muzzle, and I also did this circle with a zigzag thing down, which meant it was for like speed, to bring speed to the horse, or agility, one of the two. All these different charts had different things, honestly, but I had to take the beads off the horse because I realized I was going to have to spray it after I did my warrior paint, and it was kind of frustrating because I had to go back and fix that, but it's fine. And when I tell you this zigzag took forever, it took absolutely forever. And then I ended up getting blue paint all over the markings, and I had to go back later and fix it, and I just kept going until it reached all the way down to the hoof, which my goal was to try and match the colors to the beads best I could, and I think I did a pretty good job of that. Then I did an arrow on his neck, which I wanted to do on the other side, but of course the mane was covering it, so I just ended up doing it on this side. So I drew a line down the middle, and then it had like two triangle pieces at the end. So the arrow was a symbol of victory, which I thought really helped define the horse and all of his amazing warrior accomplishments. And the paint was just being really annoying because in some areas it would be a lot thicker, and then in other areas not so much. And I was just kind of like, ugh, this is taking forever. And I did go back and fix those lines. And then this is what all of his stuff looked like. So I did a handprint on his chest and some bands around his legs. Of course, there's the arrow I just showed you, and the circle and the stripes on his muzzle, which I added gray on the pink. This was for all of the successful house rating stuff, and then that was the speed stripe I was talking about. And I think his markings came out literally amazing. So then this was me braiding the few little pieces of embroidery floss. Again, remember I took the embroidery floss and unwoven it. That's not actually a thing, but we're calling it a thing today. And so I decided to braid it because I really wanted 2 braided pieces to connect on the tail. So I did that, and then I was just kind of measuring it and super gluing it here. So I had 1 on each side. So it connected down here. So I went and added the other piece, the other small braided piece, which these were also different colors inside the braid. So there was like a light brown and dark brown. Put some glue on the knots and squeezed them together to try and stick a little bit better because I really didn't want to make another knot. And then I started threading on some beads. So yes, there were 6 pieces, and I just chose 1 to put a bead on up where the braids connect, and to squeeze that on best I could. And then I also did that with a blue bead and a gold bead. Those gold beads are like gorgeous, by the way, guys. And I put that on. And then I had some miniature feathers, which I will go into more detail in a little bit. But I decided to go ahead and glue those on, and actually put a second one on because I wanted it to be really fluffy. And I actually made a whole bunch of little bead parts. Well, no, I attached that one and then I made more. So here is the feathers that I was talking about, which I attached to a piece of embroidery floss. Again, still just a little thread. And you see it looks amazing. So what it actually was, I think my mom said down filling or something. It was basically the inside of a winter coat, and it was just all loose. And when we took them out, they looked just like miniature feathers. So I made a whole bunch of these with some beads on it. Yes, there's some glue on the beads. I cleaned that up later. And after attaching all of these, this warrior custom was done. But of course, I had to go take pictures.
Like when I go out in public and I'm like, oh, there's people, I'm like, do I have my mask on? I still have that feeling. Does anybody else feel that way?
That's funny because now it's on a recording, and I'm glad you said that after. Now I won't keep you guys waiting, so here is the pictures of the finished model. For his name, I considered Masa Suhit, which means great chief in Native American. However, I didn't feel like that fit quite right, and it was a mouthful to say, and I wanted something a little bit easier. So after a lot of debate, I ended up choosing the name Paladin, which means a Native American warrior or fighter. It is an honorable name for a confident, fierce, and independent individual. I love this name, and I am also completely in love with this custom. I think his warrior paint came out beautifully. The markings are the best I've ever done, same with shading. I think the beads and the feather ideas were just completely spot on. He is absolutely amazing, and he will be one of my favorite customs for a very, very long time. Now I will be quiet so you guys can look at the slideshow. I hope you enjoy. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please consider checking out my Etsy shop. I sell repainted models, tack, and custom horses. Make sure to subscribe to see more horse content, and I hope you have an amazing day. Goodbye.